disciplined or fired from your job if you talk about your wages with other employees? Well, what if there's a policy that says you can't talk about your wages here at the company? I'm Karen Michael. You're listening to The Job Judge. Welcome to The Job Judge, the podcast for anyone who works. I'm Karen Michael, your host at The Job Judge, where together, one episode at a time, we are going to make workplaces work. I've been an employment lawyer for 31 years. I'm a former HR executive. I wrote the book, Stay Hired. And you deserve a safe, civil, and legally compliant workplace. And here at The Job Judge, we're going to try to make that happen. Now, I am an employment lawyer, but I cannot give legal advice on this podcast. So it is just general guidance. So let's talk about you talking about your wages at work. There was this kind of amusing thing that was going around social media. I noticed it's been since taken down, but it made all of us employment lawyers kind of chuckle because we knew how ridiculous it was. Some manager posted at a fitness center this message to employees. And I'm going to read it to you. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'm holding it up. You can kind of see this message that was posted on the board at the fitness center. And it says, "Attention all subordinates," all caps, underline, bold. Let's start there. You know that your manager sucks if he or she is posting a note, quote, "Attention all subordinates." I mean, you already know it's going south right there. It says in all caps, "Effective immediately, conversing about wages both on duty and off duty is strictly forbidden." Then it says, "This is considered proprietary information and as such, it is protected legally. If you are overheard speaking, parenthesis, or listening to exclamation points, all caps, a conversation in which wages are discussed, you will receive disciplinary action up to and including termination. As a reminder, Kentucky is an at-will state, meaning your employment can be terminated for any reason without legal percussion." I think she meant repercussion. I'm not really sure. "Or no reason," all caps. Have any questions? Ask juror. Well, juror, I want you to know everything you said in that message, other than the fact that Kentucky is an at-will state, is wrong, false, and you're a terrible manager. Let's just start there. Employees have a legal right to discuss their wages. And if you have a policy against that, then you are violating federal law. Why do I say that? There's this law out there called the National Labor Relations Act. And as part of that, employees in the private sector have a right to engage in conversations for their mutual aid and protection. It's called concerted activity. Well, Karen, what if we don't have a union? That doesn't matter. All of these rules apply whether you have a union or not. And if you go to the National Labor Relations Board's website, there's a whole section titled "Your Right to Discuss Wages." And as part of that, it says under the National Labor Relations Act, employees have the right to communicate with their coworkers about their wages, as well as with labor organizations, work centers, media, the public. Wages are a vital term and condition of employment, and discussion of wages are often preliminary to organizing and other actions for mutual aid and protection. This is what it says about your right to discuss your wages. Managers, stop disciplining employees for doing this. If you are an employee covered by the Act, most private sector employers are covered by the Act. You may discuss wages in face-to-face conversations, over the phone, in written messages. Policies that specifically prohibit the discussion of wages, so says the National Labor Relations Board, are unlawful, as are policies that chill employees from discussing their wages. So juror, this document, not legal. When using electronic communications like social media, keep in mind that your employer may have policies against using their equipment for unauthorized use, although it's possible such policies could be unlawful. You may have discussions about wages when not at work, when you are on break, and even during work if employees are permitted to have other non-work conversations. Why is that? Well, if I allow employees to talk about general other legal topics like my kids, my family, my pets, etc., then why can't I talk about my wages? So it's just kind of the same type of conversation. And I'm sure people allow people to talk about other general things. Now, if it's disruptive, if they're away from their desk for 25 minutes talking about these things, that's different. The issue isn't that they're talking about wages. The issue is that they're distracted from their job for too long and they need to get back to work. It says legally protected conversations about wages may take many forms, including having conversations about how much you and other colleagues make and managers make, presenting joint requests to the employer about pay, organizing a union for pay, etc. It also talks about you have a right to not engage in conversations or communications about your wages. And that's important because while you might want to discuss your wages, your colleagues might not want to. And so you approaching them might be, quote, legal, but it also might bother them because maybe they don't want to talk about it. Maybe they want to keep their compensation private. So you can't go complain about the fact that your colleague doesn't want to talk about how much they're making because some people want to keep that information private. It says when you and another employee have a conversation or communication about your pay, it is unlawful for your employer to punish or retaliate against you in any way for having that conversation. It is also unlawful for your employer to interrogate you about the conversation, threaten you for having it, or put you under surveillance for such conversations. Also, as points out by the National Labor Relations Board on their website, it is unlawful for the employer to have a work rule, policy, or hiring agreement that prohibits employees from discussing their wages with each other or that requires you to get the employer's permission to have such discussions. And it says if your employer does any of these things, a charge may be filed against the employer with the National Labor Relations Board. So don't have a policy like that so that you don't have to worry, employer, about having such a charge. Now, I will say that the National Labor Relations Act's protections protect non-management employees. So technically, could you have a rule that managers can't discuss their pay? If you are a federal contractor governed by the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, there is actually a provision under that law that universally states that employees have a right to discuss their pay. So if you're a federal contractor, whether you're a manager or whoever you are, you have a right to discuss your pay. The only time you can't discuss your pay is if it is an essential function of the job. So if my job is in HR and I know everybody's compensation because of that, I can't use that information in order to talk about my pay. And that just kind of makes sense. So understand there are some restrictions about that. There are also some states that have special laws that give protections to employees for discussing their wages. One of them, for example, in Virginia, where I am a practicing attorney, there is a state law that says that no employer shall discharge from employment or take other retaliatory action against an employee because the employee inquires about or discussed with or disclosed to another employee any information about either the employee's own wages or other compensation or about any other employee's wages or other compensation, or whether you file a complaint with the Department of Labor, etc. Here's a good rule. Pay your employees fairly and consistently so that you don't have to worry about if they're talking about wages because things are transparent and they're fair and they're consistent. And one of the things that burns employees up and where employers get caught off guard is when you have a long-term employee that's been there 10, 15 years and they've been advancing slowly and making their whatever percentage. And then you go outside and you bring somebody in and you pay them more than that employee has been working all that time and they have similar skills, experience, education, etc. That burns people up and it happens too often. You got to keep up. So if you're bringing in people at a higher rate of pay off the street or whatever you want to call it, then you need to then increase voluntarily before you have to, the pay of people who have been there a long time and they're getting those raises because now the going rate for that job has changed. And if you're afraid that they're going to find out that you're paying these people more, then stop doing that. Make sure that you have fair compensation. I hear all the time from people, if only I left my job and came back, I would make more money. I also hear about employees that go to their employer and say, I've done the numbers, I've run the compensation numbers, or I found out that Joe's making X, and I'd like a $5,000 increase because I have the skills, experience, education. Maybe the person has a new certification. Maybe they're using a special language that they have an expertise in now for their job, and they're asking for that added compensation. And the manager says, oh, well, we can't give you any more money. Our budget is capped. And the employee finally just leaves because he or she is so frustrated by being treated like this. And then all of a sudden, you know what that employer does? They go out and hire somebody for $10,000 more. They had the money all along. All they needed to do was to advocate for that employee. Now, I'm not saying every employee that asks for a raise should get one. Just because an employee has bought a new expensive car, they're not entitled to a raise. But we should always be evaluating our compensation practices to make sure that we're paying fairly. And don't forget, there is the Equal Pay Act, which does require that we pay men and women a fair compensation, a similar pay for similar work. So if you've got one employee doing a certain job and they have the skills, experience, education, performance, similar to another employee doing a virtually identical job with the same skills, experience, education, and performance, then they should be paid the same. That's how the law works. So make sure you take a look at your employee handbooks, employers. Make sure you don't have these kind of policies in there. And if you do, take them out. Now, every week at the Job Judge, we answer a question from a listener. Sometimes we answer a question that we see on social media. If you want to ask me a question that you want me to answer right here on the Job Judge, email me, Karen@thejobjudge.net. Just might answer your question right here on the Job Judge. Here is a question. It relates to compensation, so I wanted to answer it here. The title is, do you discuss salary and wages with colleagues? It starts with, pay transparency is a very taboo topic. Unfortunately, it kind of is. And I understand why some people don't want to talk about it, and that's fine too. But if we had better pay transparency, we probably would have more equal pay. I feel like I'm very underpaid and want to discuss my salary with employees at the same pay grade as me. Pretty large company with 13,000 employees, and I was wondering if anyone had insights into pursuing this matter. I work in HR department where I don't have access to salaries, just who is in which pay grade and whatnot. It's fine if you're in HR to talk about your own salary, but don't use information that you get from being in HR in order to advocate for yourself. Or if you're in budget or finance or you're a manager and you know things because of that role, don't use that information ever in order to advocate for yourself. That's an improper use of information. But you can certainly advocate for yourself generally, and you should advocate for yourself if you think you're not getting fair pay. Now, I hope you've enjoyed listening to the Job Judge. Please subscribe to the YouTube page. Also follow along on Spotify, Apple. Check out our TikTok, the Job Judge on TikTok and Instagram. We put lots of new content out there all the time as well. I'm Karen Michael, and you've been listening to the Job Judge.